welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubge. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Wednesday afternoon episode. Normally we do Tuesdays. And today we're going to be looking at the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's annual Cyber Threat Report 2020 to 2021. And this is going to be an industry sector review. Joining with us on a panel session will be Amit Chaubey, the New South Wales Cybersecurity Ambassador, or a New South Wales Cybersecurity Ambassador, and also cybersecurity advisors, Virginia Caligari, if I say her name correctly, and also Elliot Dallas. So we'll get on to this panel very shortly. Now, this follows on from, we interviewed Eric Abetz, Senator for Tasmania, about 10 days ago or so, just prior to this report being released, and he came out and was quoting the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's cyber incidents being reported every 10 minutes. And he had a call out for a national cyber security summit. Following that, hot off the heels, the latest report shows that the cyber security incidents are being reported an increase to every 8 minutes now. And obviously that looks like the time is ticking in terms of cybersecurity incidents being reported. So let's bring on the panel, and we've had a few technical issues with one of them. I won't dob them in, so it could be any one of these three, but let me bring on Virginia Caligari, if I say that correctly.
Hello,
Elliot
Chris.
Dallas, how you going? And Amit Chaubey, the New South Wales Cyber Security Ambassador. Amit, tell me we've got some sound. Just going to put you backstage, Amit, and I'll come back to you. But Elliot and Virginia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Great. Okay, we've got sound with you too. That's the good one. Maybe, Virginia, we'll start with you and this particular report. Now, what I do have lined up, in fact, let me just share this so we've got something to introduce the audience to for the actual report. Now, this is available on the MySecurity Marketplace, but obviously you can go to cybergov.au and get a copy of this. But we'll break it down by their main three headings: cybercrime and cybersecurity incident statistics, threat environment and key cybersecurity trends, and then how to prepare for, protect against, and respond to cybersecurity incidents. Maybe, Virginia, the importance of these reports and some of the work that you're doing and how these kind of reports help you in your work.
Yes, Chris. So Virginia Caligari, I'm the founding director of RightSec. It's a cybersecurity consultancy company based in Brisbane. And since I moved to Australia, I've been helping clients on operators of a national critical infrastructure and the financial system and the private sector as well. So this type of report I consider to be really relevant. First of all, I fully respect the source, the producers of the report. So the agencies like DIO, ASIO, ACSC, and Department of Home Affairs. And I'm thankful for all the hard work they put together to define this report. Lucky us, this is not a classified report, and this is just the second time everyone can have access to this report without needing a security clearance. And this report, when I look at this report, this is real data. That is data that otherwise wouldn't be available to us. We're not talking about predictions and a forecast of what might or might not happen. Like, we are looking at our recent past, and by understanding our recent past, as things are not changing drastically, we can make better decisions for our near future. So we don't need to keep making the same mistakes. So the data that is now available to us is really relevant to inform decisions. And this, for me, it validates my approach to cyber risk management. It's everyone who works with risk management, they know how complicated it is. Some of the time is a finger in the wind, and you don't know for sure, and you're not confident. So the data that is provided here now validates, corroborates with our assumptions. So it's of great value as well. And if I still have time to go over this, I'm talking about the report per se, not the content of the report. Cybersecurity is all core to cybersecurity is risk management. Everything cybersecurity is about risk management, regardless of the standard that you're using, if it's ISO, if it's NIST, if it's SOC 2, there will be a requirement for you to perform risk management. And it means identify your threat landscape, your cyber threat landscape, where you identify risks and treat risks. There are different methodologies and techniques for you to do this. You can do brainstorming, research, you can do Delphi techniques, SWOT, talk to peers, gather data from your technology platform. Myself, I like doing research. So when I list the risks and the threat actors and the size of the threat and the loss, I go and research and I search for the evidence to corroborate with my assumptions. What this report now does, it makes my life much easier. Also, it might even take some of my clients from me, because now they can go themselves, and when they need to go over the risk management review. So we have ransomware as one of the entries of our risk register. Is ransomware still a threat? Is ransomware applicable to my industry? I'm healthcare, or I'm education, or I am state level government. So that's how I see this type of report come in handy for us.
You're finding it gives validation to the work that you're doing with your client. I think one of the things to highlight is it's only their second unclassified report since their 2018 move into the ASD. They do sort of highlight that it was unclassified, so they may well have been doing other cyber threat reports they have not released. So it might be, obviously the format is different. It's a well presented report and is released for public disclosure, obviously, so it's a bit of polish around it as well. Elliot, how do you find, again, before we dive into the report, and I do have all the figures sort of cut out that we can walk through what the trends are, but these types of reports, you do either share around to your client, or you definitely read and look for that validation to the work that you're doing when you do consult with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a bit of context about myself. So I've founded my own cybersecurity consultancy. So obviously being across of threat intelligence, understanding the direction that the ISM and the Essential 8 is likely to head, understanding the rationale behind the maturity levels is really important as well, because often I think clients can sometimes see these mandates come out of government, but not necessarily understand the rationale that sits behind it. So I think it's really good that the ACSC has had some of this transparency about defining why they consider these threats to be the most critical to Australia. Previously as well, I led the strategic consulting practice for a global managed service provider across the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. So one of the things I used to see a lot of, obviously, would be regional specific threat intelligence. And one of the things that we see is that largely by virtue of our geography and our time zone, that Australia isn't impacted the same way as a lot of these threats. And one of the particularly interesting statistics I think that has come out of this is that there's been a 15%, at least according to the ACSC's reporting, a 15% increase in ransomware in Australia, which is interesting because it's significantly lower than other regions. For example, Checkpoint recently released a report where they said there's a 29% increase in ransomware activity globally, of which 36% was larger in, there's a 36% increase in the Europe, Middle East and Africa region, and a 24% increase in the Americas. So what we're also seeing, as well as getting an update on, you know, this is how the threats are evolving, is also understanding where Australia fits into the bigger picture. I would like to think it's because Australian organisations are really diligent about applying strong controls to administrative privileges and patching infrastructure, but it's worth recognising that largely by virtue of our geography, that impacts the threat landscape for us as well. Previously as well, I used to work, I started my career as an operations manager for the Department of Defence. So I have some experience, I suppose, navigating the full spectrum of threats that Australian organisations face. And it's really, I think it's really good to see that the ACSC is making some of this threat intelligence publicly available. And as you called out, since becoming a statutory agency, I think one of the main questions has been, well, what is this going to allow these organisations to do that they haven't been able to do previously? And providing unclassified reports like this, I think, is a great step in the right direction. And we also see this backed in some of the data as well, right? I think one of the most significant data points from this report is that there's been a 310% increase in calls to the reporting hotline. That's fantastic. For me, that is a real validation that people are actually seeing the ACSC as an organization that they can call upon for advice. And it's not just sort of a tick in the box and sort of a symbolic agency. It's actually there to provide real, meaningful, actionable intelligence, which my clients can use to improve their security posture.
I think what we are showing, we're going to bring a minute on now, but one thing, as I mentioned with our interview with Senator Betts, when you've got sort of senators who don't normally deal with cybersecurity, looking at the ACSC and looking at what they are advising and reporting on, and then these reports coming out. So we have the full spectrum at senior politicians versus frontline cybersecurity consultants take value out of these reports, and hence the industry sector review that we wanted to capture here. Amit, how are we going with sound there for you?
Can you hear me now?
We have sound.
Yes.
We have launch. We can launch off with Amit. Thank you so much for joining us. Amit Chorby, you're a New South Wales Cybersecurity Ambassador. Thanks for joining us. And sorry for the technical issues, but great to have you with us.
Yeah, after a long time, I had these technical issues, maybe the first time using the platform, but I was hearing Virginia and Elliot. Thanks for your input. So again, when I was reading this report, not really the report, but if you really look the theme, those basic problems still exist. People are still dealing with the same basic problem. You talk about vulnerability management, you talk about the business email phishing, and ransomware is just that additional threat which has over the period of time has beefed up because people are still trying to, people are still worried about big things, but they're really not focusing on the very small thing. Either you take of any of the examples of the recent last, I think so 2 to 3 years, every time there's any problem happen, and when you do the post-incident review and the outcome, you will see definitely that, okay, something was left alone long time back and nobody focused on that. And hence you end up with ability exploited over the period of time. I think so last 2 weeks back, the business email compromise, a good example. There was a Sydney couple who was trying to buy a house, and the lawyer has been compromised in the back end, and the hackers has used the lawyer's email to send it back and forth, build the trust, and then eventually ask them to transfer $1 million. And eventually they realized that, they have lost $1 million.
Wow.
So I think I would say that if you look altogether, a report is just saying that you still need to do your basic stuff properly and ensure you are working on them before you actually talk about the bigger stuff and advanced technologies and implement something which is.
Yeah, look, one thing I think from the audience perspective, one of the other things is to actually go read the report. Is one of the messages out of here is flick through it. It's well presented in that, and you raise business email compromise. It's still amazing that we're still talking Beck fraud now, but there is actually a hedge fund went out of business and was bankrupted. Yep. And it's a great case study. It highlights the case studies here. So let's walk through some of the key figures, and I think that'll guide the discussion. And as I said, if you've got any comments or say g'day to the panel on our chats, and that tells me that we're actually out there as well. I know we're on YouTube at least. Let me just bring up where I was, and we'll walk through the key figures for this particular session. So the first one is the cybercrime reports by month for financial year compared with the financial year previous year. That's pretty flat line, and that notable spike in April 2020 related to a bulk extortion campaign resulting in nearly half of the cybercrime reports for that month. Any comments there on the trends over the 1920 and the 2021 period? Because we have been hearing that there has been an increase, particularly in ransomware and the like activity, but it doesn't look like it's been a significant rise in the number of reports by month broken down. Any thoughts there, Virginia?
Yes. One thing that when you look at the whole report and you see that 35% of all incidents reported, they come from government, independently of the level, you also assume that they are mandated to report. So private sector might not be reporting every single ransomware. Yeah. If they start reporting, they might even get the help they need to see the money back, like the colonial pipelines. if they give the ACSC and the other Australian intelligence agency the chance to jump in and help them, then I believe we would be seeing a higher number this year if compared to last year. And in 2019, I was working as a CISO for an aviation company, and one of the reports to the board, updates to the board, I wrote that 2019, the year of ransomware. I'm about to change my theory to the decade of ransomware because it's here to stay, and the numbers just confirm it. And now it's a double sword, double extortion methodology. Apart from encrypting your data and asking you money to decrypt, they also are now threatening to make the information available on the internet. So there's a risk of data breach. So the extortion is coming from two sides. Although you don't see more ransomware, only 15% more than last year, now they are more sophisticated. They're more accessible as well because there's ransomware tools for hire on the internet, and they can take more money from the target. So might be only 15% more, but the ability to cause damage is considerably higher.
Yeah, in terms of that monetary damage as well. So we're looking at around that 6,000 mark, I would suggest, monthly reports now, and that obviously overlooks at around 70-odd thousand to nearly 80,000 reports per year. This was an interesting one. This is the breakdown of cybercrime incidents by assigned jurisdiction. Queensland, up there in Brisbane. Virginia, what are you doing? You're copping most of the assigned incidents.
So cyber criminals, they are motivated by finance. Financial motivation is still the biggest, and because Queensland has had less lockdowns and is more active and operational, that could be one of the potentially.
Maybe Amit, what's your take on this one? On 30%. Obviously, it's focused there on the East Coast, but even New South Wales at 18% is quite low, and Victoria and Queensland quite out in front. I'm wondering if that's got anything to do with the communication strategies in those states for encouraging reporting of incidents.
So one thing Virginia did suggested that number of people who is reporting it, right? So depending on what support is available, I don't think so every private organizations are possibly reporting it. They might be attacked, and then the back end they have settled the because I think so along with the attack, and once you report, there's a lot of other thing goes in the back in terms of the reputational risk, and they might not be in a position to take the reputational risk because they might just pay it off and move on. They might not be paying that. So I will be thinking more like numbers will increase over the period of time, because ACSC, if you really look this report, ACSC is really encouraging people to be the partner of ACSC. They're happy to help you. I think so the messaging coming from the government that we are here to help you, and I initially possibly people are not very sure whether they should go to ACSC or they should go to someone else, but I think so with the transparency and a lot of focus on the cybersecurity in the country, people are coming up and organizations are coming up and partnering with the ACSC. So these numbers might look 18%, 30%, 1%. It's very varied. If you see all around, if you look these numbers, it start from 1% to then 7, then 10, then 30, 18 to there's no similarity, right? So
it's quite contrasting.
So it might come to a level where the whole national strategy which has been put in place, a lot of initiative which we are currently working on, that might bring this to some consistency, and also depend on the number of incidents happening in that particular state, right? So these numbers are just the reflection. If you really look and you reflect on these numbers, cybercrime is happening everywhere. Depending on who is reporting is different thing, but it's everywhere, and I think so they're all dealing with the same challenge.
I would agree with that. And go, Elliot. We just had a quick comment from Gabriella. Density population compared with other states, definitely on the East Coast for sure. But Elliot, your views on this?
Yeah, look, I think Virginia and Amit hit the nail on the head that it's really important to not confuse reports of cyber incidents with occurrence of cyber incidents, right? And this is one of the first signs, as a consultant, when you start working with an organization, the most dangerous situation is to have a false sense of security because you're not detecting anything, so you assume that means you're not being targeted. And I think you see this disparity a lot, for example, between business email compromise and ransomware. I often think, compared to the media coverage that ransomware gets, that business email compromise is comparatively a silent killer. Yeah. And that's because it's easier to cover up, right? If your critical infrastructure goes down, people are going to notice. Not so obvious when it comes to payments. And obviously as well, it's easier to not have to report. People might want to get their money back, but at the same time, a business email compromise attack is unlikely to affect PII, probably not even going to be classified as a breach as well. So there's less of an impetus to do so. I think one of the interesting data points around here as well, if you compare the ACSC's report to, say, the FBI's cybercrime report, one of the things that they talk about is getting back $380 million worth of losses for American companies. And so this might be an opportunity for the ACSC to think about, well, how can they emulate this sort of model and how can they market it to increase that, I suppose, motivation for organizations to report these incidents when they occur. Just to quickly jump back to a point that you both mentioned as well regarding the Australian hedge fund, I think what's really interesting about that example is they actually got their money back. $8.7 million was compromised. They got the money back. The reason they went bankrupt is because the reputational damage. They lost their main client.
I've got that case study on here. Yeah, it was that reputation, and the client walked because they didn't meet that standard. We will come back to that one, Elliot. And I like the way you could have said, well, look, this is just sort of assigned incidents. It doesn't really give us a picture in terms of what's actually happening. And hence this one breaks it down a little bit further now in terms of what those reports by type are. And someone can go answer the door if they want. I'm hearing a doorbell. That's live. That's live TV for you. So this one breaks it down, and Beck fraud's only 7% there, down the bottom left, down here. But then the main one is that fraud and shopping, and I think shopping is probably a key factor given that we're all shopping online. In fact, the delivery's just arrived to Amit's place for his online shopping. What are your thoughts on this? And is this maybe coming back to what you're seeing with clients, the breakdown here and where some of the key factors are, what might be?
Virginia? So
go, Virginia.
This report not only for business, it's for families and individuals as well. So, and even the ACSC has now this partnership program where they can take business and families and individuals to be partnered with them and have access to information with different level of classification as well. So when you look at, there's the romance scams and the bullying, and it's all calculated because everything that is reported come to the equation. But when you look at a specific cybercrime against organizations, then BEC's not irrelevant compared to the others. So
you've got bulk extortion. Bulk extortion would be a ransomware. Elliot, would that be classified as ransomware? Bulk extortion, do you think? Without going to the report.
Sorry,
Chris, if I can jump in, I think the real value of this data here is just to finally dispel the myth that you still sometimes hear when people say that they think they wouldn't be a target. What this shows is that when it comes to cybercrime, opportunistic, easy, financially viable attacks are those that are going to be the most common. And as you have here, BC only represents 7%. Why? Because it's a fairly sophisticated heist to actually pull off. You have to have some intelligence about how the financial processes of an organization operates. You have to have some sort of so you can craft the fraudulent email in the first place, if that's how you're doing it. Whereas, sending 1 million people a dodgy eBay link in the hope that, 10 in a million will click it, it's actually really straightforward. It's quite easy to do. So I think the value in this is just recognizing that, whether you're a small business owner, a large corporation, or someone simply shopping and managing accounts online, you have to be always vigilant that there are people that are going to make these opportunistic attacks.
The other one is, as Virginia correctly points out, the ACSC is there for all of Australia. So it's not just the big end of town, or it's there for SMBs and also for individuals and family. And that's one thing I do like about the ACSC in terms of their charter of responsibility is for everything. Amit, without disclosing where you work or represent, but you could be potentially the big end of town. Anything here stands out for you? So if you were going to highlight this to the board?
See, I think I'll go back a little bit on how this categorization has happened, right? So take an example, a BEC attack could end up with a fraud risk, right?
Yeah.
So you might have got an email, but eventually the way it has been categorized here could be a fraud risk, right? Your bulk extortion could, so depending on how the categorization is happening for this whole graph here, it's really sometimes confusing to me. So if you say online banking, are we sure that online banking is only 12%? But I think so when something has happened, how that has been categorized. Like last year when the pandemic had started, a lot of people, there was a scam going on about, a lot of people are buying the puppies and they send the money to breeder and they realize that it's not gone to the breeder, right? That might sit in the online, that might sit in the shopping, that might sit in the fraud as well, because people have been, you know, sending the money but not receiving the delivery, and in that case it was the topic. Depending on how, but if you really go back to the first page of the entire report, key things which I thought Virginia has also highlighted, ransomware risk is there and it's going to be there. It started back 1990 to 95. It started with the malware virus and put the USB drives there, and over the period of time it's getting sophisticated, right? So that is going to exist. But at the same point in time, if you really look the other pieces in the report, exploiting the vulnerability, right? That's there for the long time. Is hackers are still exploiting the vulnerabilities, which possibly 7 years back it has been released. But what is new happening, the vectors are keep changing. So suddenly you realize working on a ransomware problem, and then now you're seeing the supply chain risk has emerged, right? So if you look all this together and you fit that all those attacks in this particular graph, I'm not sure which one fits where, but this is pretty much a broader categorization of what's all happening and where you possibly need to focus on.
I think you've got the other. We've spoken to Julian Mangrant too, from in terms of her role as a commissioner on safety and e-safety, and they take some of these reports as well, bullying and harassment. And then you've obviously got probably state police taking some of these reports on fraud. So, but again, I think it highlights the extent of cybersecurity and the types of reports being taken. This one here, and Peter Dellis, I don't know if you're a relation there, but he's asked, it would be interesting to see the data, data by size of financial loss in addition to the number of reports. And this one kind of takes that to answer that. So cybercrime reports an average reported loss by organisation size. So we're up at around that 33,000 mark. Small business, 8,500 or nearly 9,000, and large organisations up around 20. So that medium-sized business, they're getting hit there. And that's one thing always, over the years, we've always been increasingly trying to raise awareness between small and medium-sized businesses that they are not immune. For many years, we're talking about the sort of the big end of town, the banks and the telcos, and then the SMBs were left alone and not really engaged. And I think this is really starting to mark that as well. And then the other one here was the call volumes by financial year. Elliot, I think you raised the call volume. Someone did in terms of who's calling and when. There's no real trends there compared to the monthly reports that they're getting either. Anything falls out here? In fact, what I'll do, rather than, this is a bit of a boring graph, but it tells you that it's pretty consistent.
No, but one thing you have to really look. If you really go and wait for the next year report, if it comes out, then possibly you'll have 3-year trend. And that will give you a fair idea, because at this point in time, you really see there's a big difference between this year and the previous year. So I think so all the initiative which is currently going through on the education, awareness, uplifting the capabilities and all, that will give us some trend in possibly next year if things are really stabilizing or it's continuously increasing, and then we have to do a little bit more. But this trend is basically, it's not giving that level of detail.
We've got some. Just when I was going to make a comment.
If I may, I used to head the cybersecurity capacity for the nuclear-powered submarine for the Brazilian Navy as a lieutenant officer.
Well, you're going to have a new job here with AUKUS, by the way, but anyway, go.
Yeah, so, and I'm formally educated in intelligence as well, in counterterrorism. So for myself, there was intel feeds and threat intel feeds available and people on call to come and help me respond to an incident. What I understand that is happening in Australia, the level of sophistication of the criminal organizations, the organized cybercrime and state-sponsored organizations as well, the level of sophistication is so high that many companies now, they cannot manage to solve the problem by themselves. So they are forced to report and get in touch with the ACSC to get the help that they need. Because like if you are an operator of critical infrastructure, but you might be a small maritime organization or you are a bank or something like this. And although you have a team that seems to be adequate for the size of the need, but the time comes when you need more help. If you are dealing with state-sponsored actors, if you're dealing with organized cybercrime, you might get in touch with the right entities within the government, and then you need to report.
Yep. One thing I noticed here, sorry, Virginia, the September and March period, do you think that might come around to auditing or reporting process there as well? It does seem to kind of highlight March is really up there, as is September. Would that potentially align to sort of quarterly reviews?
Yeah, and the financial year and auditing rounds and the chance of fraud, like man in the middle pretending to be any of the ends of the process to get the data.
Yeah, could be quarterly accounts, correct. Yeah, we've
just the other thing, Chris, is, you know, criminals need holidays too. And I think one of the things that we're seeing reflected in this data is the fact that, you know, there has been a huge transfer of wealth to these criminal organizations. You know, the REvil ransomware crew reportedly made 100 million in profit in the last 12 months. There's a reason that they've all gone to the Baltic Sea for holiday to get some rest and recuperation, because they're now planning the next wave of attacks. And in your previous graph, I think there's a point here that's really important, right? Is that there is a bell curve when it comes to how viable you are as a target, because once you get big enough, you've got lots of money, so someone wants to come after you. But once you get too big, then you're going to start investing in things like SOCs and SIEMs and more advanced security controls, and so you're going to be harder to crack. So it makes sense that those medium businesses are the ones that cyber criminals are most interested in. And another point as well that I think is really important to make, and it also ties back to what Amit mentioned about looking at things in terms of 3-year cycles. One of the things that I try to say is, you know, this year's wastage or this year's attack potentially funds next year's attack. And this is a really, really important thing to bear in mind, that we have to think about the downstream impacts of these things, right? If these organizations are making millions and millions of dollars now, it might take a couple of years before we start to see the impacts of that. And I think the first sign of this is in one of the key data points that the ACSC report calls out, is the time between detection of a vulnerability and exploitation is rapidly reducing. Where do we see this trend? In the tech industry in general. The more money an organization has, the faster it can operationalize and monetize the technology that it has. And it just so happens that these organizations are monetizing and operationalizing security vulnerabilities.
Yep, and they're keeping quite current with it too. And this also goes back to, I mean, this was, if we looked at their last report, the last one we had a C1 event. That was the attack or the compromise of Parliament House. And their email system breach. So that was our first national crisis that was called out, the first national cyber crisis. So the C2 level and the C1 level is void there. So that's a good thing, I suppose, from a government perspective. And also the C6s, the members of the public and sustained interruption of essential services. So again, these sort of top levels here, we want blank. But then again, we talked about that medium here in that blue is really the crux. C4s, state government, academia, research and development, large organisations and supply chains, malware, beaconing and other active network intrusion, temporary system and service disruption. something we've definitely been covering off in the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. We've had a number of universities, schools, hospitals, all taken offline at certain degrees as well. Again, one thing I monitor is, say, the SEEK adverts for security roles, cybersecurity roles, and there's no shortage, and hence talking to a few consultants here as well that have gone independent. There's enough work out there for independents as well, and you have to get ingrained into the business. Where do you three see the demand on the services, and maybe around that state government, academia, research and development, the mid-size organisations? Is that your bread and butter profile of your clients? Without disclosing too much.
I would say,
Go, Virginia.
Sorry, and I would say that we cater for every type of business in every size. Like with my business, so we also offer discounted rates or no cost work for not-for-profits, because for me it's serving the country that welcomed me. It's not only about doing the work. Because if you look at those numbers here of the C5s and C4s, why is academia and education there? We have a few countries in this world that they are under embargoes and sanctions. They cannot buy education from abroad. They cannot establish their labs. They cannot evolve and get research done by themselves. So they resort to countries like Australia and other Western countries that are more evolved with technology. So if you are in the sector of education or healthcare and you are creating something new, even defense, there will be people out there that they are keen on getting what you have. And they are sponsored by their state governments, but by their countries. They're not just a boy in a basement with a hoodie. So I do lots of education and healthcare, because I found it like working to protect this type of information that is essential for my country.
Amit, maybe to you on this one, on the C4s, and you've got national infrastructure in there and supply chains. Are you finding, in your experience, supply chains are getting hit with these low-level malicious attacks?
So a few things to look. That particular C4 is quite expanded. You take the C4 300 plus 204, right? So 504 altogether. But if you take that number, I think so the key is what's the motive behind it. It's not about medium loss. So if somebody, take an example, last year we started hearing about people who is doing the COVID vaccine research, they are getting targeted, right? So the motive was to disrupt that whole thing. So your pandemic might go for a long time, and then people will make more money, because there's a lot of motive behind. So I think the first thing to understand, what's the motive behind it. Second, where the world is going. So if you talk about supply chain, that everybody know the cloud first strategy, a lot of organizations adopted the cloud first strategy. So if you're moving the things where you have more control in your organization to a world where you might have a joint responsibility about managing something, that's where the motive is, because they know that instead of going and disrupting to someone directly, I have an indirect way of disrupting someone, and that's another motive. So I think so the key here for me, because if you're going to the example cloud first strategy, then of course you're working with possibly some supplier, right? So that supplier may be catering to 500 odd clients. So you have a very big pool to interrupt that, and might be able to drive your own motive and what you're looking for. If you're looking for the financial gain, you might get more money than compared to just going and disrupting a very small or medium size. So it's also depend on and people do monitor, like criminals are monitoring who is growing, who is not growing, what's actually you are doing as a business. So they might not target you unless they are really upset with you. Some of the employees is working for you and he decided to go and become hacker and he was very upset, he might drive that. But if people are driving from the financial gain perspective, they might see, are you really capable to pay me off, right? If I do something, they might not just put their effort there. So what you all both said, I think it's important that the motive is the key, and motive drives a lot of outcome for these cybercrime.
Elliot, maybe coming back to what you said, this is sort of a precursor to what we may yet see down the track. They've made a lot of money. They're growing in sophistication and they're training themselves further as well. This C4 level here is low-level malicious attacks, targeted reconnaissance. So that's recon is really the key part of any attack and can take the longest period of time. And we have a lot of weight here in the recon side as well. So, you know, you do a lot of recon across industry sectors, and then you can start to escalate that type of attack, move east and west and the like, and really embed yourself. Do you think that's a bit of a red flag to what we might see in the future as well? We'll be able to timestamp this session here.
Honestly, on this one, I don't think we will see a huge change because.
Okay, well, there goes that
idea. Well, look, and I'll explain my reasoning, right? So, I mean, reconnaissance is passive. Like, you'll recon anything that you might potentially be able to get an attack against. So you expect to see more reconnaissance for lower maturity organizations. The reason I think we see these density of incidents in the center here is because you think about the organizations that we're talking about. We're talking about state government, we're talking about universities, we're talking about research organizations. Fundamentally, these are organizations that have a strong information sharing mandate. If you're a university that hosts a research environment that you need people from all around the world to be able to access, you've got students dispersed across all around the world that need to be able to submit assignments, you know, you have a really strong information sharing mandate. And security inevitably is a balance between trying to protect information confidentiality and making it available to the people that need it. So I think it's actually quite natural to see organizations that, you know, are engaging with the community, like health organizations that store valuable data, but also need to make that data freely accessible to the right people, increasingly attacked. Because if you've got, you know, a larger attack surface area and you're storing valuable data, you are more likely to be targeted by a cyber attacker, whether it's opportunistic or if it is a targeted intrusion.
And I think it's also the numbers there as well. Just the numbers of medium-sized organisations represent what 90% of our economy anyway. So again, the volume is there. This one, I think Virginia kind of highlighted the Commonwealth and state governments, their mandatory reporting, and they're actively reporting their attacks. But they're way out in front. Professional, scientific and technical services there under 10%, but Commonwealth and state and territory governments taking up around 35% of all of that. So really representing the majority of the top 10 reporting sectors for that financial year. Any surprises here?
I don't print anything home, and if I need to print, I have a cross-blade shredder. Because if you look at those, you look at those professional, scientific, and technical services. I am the cybersecurity advisor of large and middle-sized organizations. I'm supposed to be the weakest link. I am not, because I'm paranoid, so everything's security in my life. But I think that by hacking professional and scientific and technical services, you might gain access to the big fish. You just need a point of entrance as well. So maybe that could be the reason that right below government at the different levels, you're going to have professional services, because they rely on professional services. And so if those guys can be hacked, then they can allow for an entrance to the government.
Yeah, we've seen recently insurance companies being hacked for their list of cyber insurance clients, so they can then target them knowing that they're going to pay. But this rings pretty true to us. Retail, construction and manufacturing, there at the lower end as well, although fin and insurance is there. Next one, top 5 reporting sectors for ransomware. Just conscious of time, so we might walk through these a little bit faster. But again, Virginia, highlighting what you just said, the professional, scientific and technical services is way out in front. You're not going to ransomware the government, are you? They're not going to pay. No. It's not going to work. But the lawyers, again, may be there.
So I can give an example. Sometime that those category which I'm going to talk about don't exist. I know someone who was a surgeon working as a individual practice, and because he was doing very high profile surgery, the information the person was carrying was quite sophisticated from the business perspective, but he possibly had a very small practice of 5 people or 7 people, including himself, and then somebody tried to get into the computer and hack something. Now if you look around of all this information. It might not fit anywhere, but the impact on that particular person, because the person was carrying that information which was related to very high profile people, that actually is a very different way of looking whether, I'm not sure whether the person will report here or not, but those who has the mandatory obligation, as we spoke about, you will see the numbers going up, because that is a push that you have to do it. But then there's an unreported as well. So I'm not sure whether these graphs and percentage really mean anything in terms of a direct relationship, but what we all know that it's impacting everyone.
I think if you said that was a surgeon, I would have fallen that under professional and scientific as well. So it's whether they're reporting it or not. And here is the average reported losses per Beck fraud. So this is, we're going to come up to the Beck example here that Elliot raised very early, but 50 grand for the average loss, that's gone up, 60%.
So you need to look carefully at those numbers, because a company might say 50K is within my risk appetite. I don't need to do anything, but this is just the average.
Average, yeah.
Some organizations, they cannot even face bankruptcy if they suffer a back at high sophistication, and so I'm careful with the way you should look at this, because
you've obviously got those peaks. Yeah, the average could be low levels, but you know, you're going to get some spikes in there. And this is a couple of case studies. One, this is an AFP operation, Operation Dolos, multi-agency Beck task force, and they prevented more than 8.45 million being lost from the Australian community to Beck. And the case study that Elliot raised, $8.7 million transfer. Elliot, you mentioned that they got that money back, but they went into receivership after that. It's not a good look, and you can only imagine the stress. I don't know, did it say who in the business did that? Because, yeah, that's pretty bad, hey?
Yeah, and look, it's one of the few data points we have about being able to point to how much reputational impact can actually cost an organization. It's one of the most challenging components of trying to articulate cyber risk to an organization, is saying, well, yeah, Sonic Wall is another great example. You know, they may not see contracts be not renewed for another 2 or 3 years still. It can take years and years for reputational impacts to properly materialize. So I think it's useful for the ACSC to point this out. So you can say, well, look, you know, you lost $200,000 from this business email compromise attack, but in reality, that might just be the tip of the iceberg.
And it's the flow-on effects from something like this as well. As this highlights, it didn't put them out of business directly, but it's the flow on. And I think that's what we're going to start to see with, say, the ransomware attacks and the like. Should that legislation start to come through, that they have to report it, and a range of others as well. And that's pretty much it in terms of the main figures. As we mentioned, the highlight here was to highlight the report and get people to read it. Any closing comments overall on any of these three? And yeah, the key things that organisations should be looking at. Amit?
Yeah.
Sorry, go Amit.
I just wanted to go back on just the previous one. If you see from the hedge fund as an organizational perspective, $8.7 million is nothing in terms of if they want to make profit, right? Because they can make that profit quite fast because they're in the business. But if you really see the 8.7 million to make, for them to make it, possibly take say a month, and they make the profit. But just because that 8.7 million, if translated into the business risk, they have gone into the bankruptcy. So if you look, that's why I was telling about the impact versus motive, what actually is going to work out. And I think so they need to look in terms of the motive, impacts, and how you are going to manage the risk. At the end of the day, it's managing the risk. And sometimes they don't know even that the risk exists. I think so that's where the risk professionals need to come in the picture and explain to them what the risk you're carrying, rather than just explaining it's a cyber problem.
For me as a consultant, this just highlights, this is something you might put in a risk management plan for the board to say, look, this is the type of risk we're dealing with, and there's, you know, this is either an industry associated or a good example to put in there, so you can hang your hat and go, look, this does actually happen. And Beck fraud is so avoidable, Virginia, your thoughts here?
Yeah, this is Beck and the CEO fraud is always part of my awareness training as well, because then you train the finance department and the executives and executive assistant, because they're going to be targeted. So I would say that a recommendation on what to do, I would use the words from ACSC. So what they recommending is report all cybercrimes, become an ACSC partner, know your network and your infrastructure, patch your systems, ideally within 48 hours, because criminals are now exploiting zero-day exploits. Evaluate your the supply chain risks, and prepare for a cybersecurity incident. The readiness to respond is really important, because if you have 60 minutes, 60 seconds to save the world, you don't want to spend 59 planning. Have the plan ready, know your capacities, know your readiness to respond, and a good plan will have even the contacts who you need to contact during the incident, and then you make sure you're going to have the help of cyber policing unit. You're going to have a form to report to ACSC. You're going to be ready to solve it as soon as possible and reduce the damage.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, Chris, Virginia has really hit the nail on the head, right? Like, testing the incident response plan is one of the most critical things you can do. And I've actually helped an organization manage a live incident where the phone numbers listed in the plan weren't up to date. And the first 2 hours were spent trying to track down the asset owners and the network engineers because no one's contact information was up to date. It sounds trivial, but making sure that you have those essentials crossed off is really, really key. And I think, look, my overall impression of the report, what I think is really quite telling, is that there's obviously across the board a significant rise in cybercrime, but fundamentally the essential 8 are pretty much unchanged. And I think that is really the key message here, right? Do the basics and do them well. Know what your top threats and risks are, so you know what you're trying to protect against. Know what your most sensitive and critical assets are, so you know what you need to protect yourself. Improve network visibility. That's a really common theme in the report as well. You know, it's no good having a network diagram that isn't an accurate reflection of your environment if you're trying to figure out how you can isolate a live intrusion. Reduce the attack surface area overall. That can be improving processes so you have less blind spots. Obviously, doing the basics like patching vulnerable infrastructure, managing privileged accounts, all really, really critical, because again, it comes back to what Virginia said. You want to reduce the amount of time it takes from detection of an incident to response. And the more you can reduce your attack surface area, the better chance you have of honing in on the initial intrusion and any lateral movement or any privilege escalation as soon as it occurs.
One thing we've noticed, just to close off, is, and I'm just conscious of time, is the convergence of physical security and cyber as well. So you've really got to bring your physical security play in and make sure that you're doing both, because there's no point doing one without the other. So just an interview this morning with Genetech. That's another interview we've got coming out. Their video management system and their command and control, very much talking cyber in that physical environment. So look, thank you so much to our panel. I do appreciate we've just went for the full hour and we were a couple of minutes late, but I'm just going to close off with what we've been up to. But we've been joined by Amit Chorby, who's a New South Wales Cyber Security Ambassador, and Valerie Calgary.
Virginia?
Right? Virginia Valerie. I don't know where I got Valerie from, but Virginia I was focusing on the Calgary.
Yeah.
There you go. So Virginia, Caligari. That's right. You got to say it correctly. Thanks, Virginia. And Elliot Dellis there in Melbourne as well. Thank you so much for your time. And hopefully to have you back. I think this is something we could do again on the cyber security reports from the Australian Cyber Security Centre. And thank you to the Australian Cyber Security Centre for all that work that they're doing. And taking those calls. I always say that there's people with real jobs, and they've definitely got one of them. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to the audience. And we'll see you again on Friday morning for MySecurityTV Live.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, bye.
Cheers.